Hi there, I'm here to talk to you a bit about interaction design today. My name is Girard. I'm an instructor here at Carr University of Art and Design. And I've joined forces with FOW Hacks Hackathon for this Fireside chat. Today I'll introduce myself. I'll talk about three main topics that are on my mind about interaction design. And I'll wrap up with some questions for you that I have that hopefully you'll be able to give me some input on how to answer. This will be the first in a series of videos talking about trends that are going on in interaction design. So hopefully here in 2019, we're talking about current trends that are on my mind today. But as we move into 2020 and beyond, we'll continue with these videos and I'll talk more about trends that are happening then. The three main trends that I want to cover today are, firstly, I want to talk a bit about acronyms and definitions around interaction design. I feel like there's a lot of ambiguity in this area and I think it's a good jumping off point. Next we'll talk about the Raspberry Pi. It's a cheap computer that you can use for experiments. And third, I'll talk about value proposition design, which is a nice analog tool for you guys to use as entrepreneurs or people who are working with startups. And that's how I'll start. So just to go into detail about who I am, I'm an alumnus of Carr University of Art and Design. I attended between 1998 and 2005, and I earned a degree in communication design with a coursework in industrial design in 2005. Most recently, for the past 4 years or so, I've been teaching here at Carr University of Art and Design. I teach interaction design mainly on a 6-month certificate program, but I've also taught as a sessional instructor on interaction design on the degree program, and I've also been a researcher as part of continuing studies as exploring UX and exploring possibilities in interaction design education. In terms of industry, I've worked as a staff UX designer at Lenovo really early on in my career in Beijing at their Innovation Design Center. And I've also taught overseas. I spent about a year in India teaching interaction design at a design school there, and also I spent about 4 years in China, 1 year of that teaching at a university, teaching interaction design there in Shanghai. That kind of sums me up. So let's jump into it. So this first topic is an interesting topic because it's very current and it's something that we deal with. To jump right in, we're talking about UX, UI, VR, AR, XR, UXD, IXD. What are these and what do they mean? I think it's ambiguous. To jump in and define some of them, IXD means interaction design, UX means user experience, UXD means user experience design. But what do all these really mean? I feel like it's a bit ambiguous and there's a lot of overlap. Different companies define their designers that they hire using these terms, so that's something that I also want to jump into a bit, is these definitions. We talk about UX meaning user experience, and we define some designers as user experience designers. We define other designers as product designers. That's a ambiguous changing term which used to mean something and now means something else. Some designers, we call them UX UI designers, so we prioritize the user experience, and then secondly we talk about user interface design. And then others we talk about as UI UX designers, so we're prioritizing the interface design and secondly talking about user experience. So as you can imagine, this is a really gray area, and to jump into it in a bit more detail, conventionally a company like Facebook will hire all of their designers as product designers. It's a bit of a generalization, but generally they call their designers product designers. Google calls them interaction designers. Apple hires product designers doing physical products, but also hires UX designers, which are user experience designers. So interaction design for Google, product design for Facebook, the others like Apple or Amazon. Amazon uses UX designer, So we've got a lot of ambiguity, we've got a lot of definition according to different companies, and do they mean different things? Are they doing different tasks? That's maybe one of the questions that I'll ask you at the end. So that's enough about acronyms and definitions. Next I want to talk a bit about the Raspberry Pi. The Raspberry Pi is basically a $30 computer that's used for entrepreneurship and startups and education. The Raspberry Pi has a lot of kind of technological aspects to it. The current one has 4 USB ports. It's got an HDMI port, so you can attach an HDMI monitor to it. You can use the USB ports to attach a USB keyboard or a USB mouse. It has Wi-Fi built in, so you can log into your home network over Wi-Fi. It has a port for the power source, so when you plug that into your wall, that's what starts up the Raspberry Pi, and when you unplug it, that's what shuts down the Raspberry Pi. Or if you unplug it from that port, that will shut down the Raspberry Pi as well. It has a micro SD port as well for a micro SD card, and that micro SD card acts as the hard drive for the Raspberry Pi. So it stores all its information on that micro SD card. You can use that micro SD card in your computer or in a disk reader and read it like any other micro SD card. But for the purpose of the Raspberry Pi, it acts as the hard drive. So it has all of these different technologies. To add on to that, in a more complicated thread, there are different add-ons that you can add to the Raspberry Pi. Right now I'm using one called SenseHat. SenseHat's really great for measuring things like temperature and humidity. And then I'm also using another one which is a camera attachment. There are a couple of camera attachments that you can get these days. There's a infrared model to take pictures in the dark, and then there's a regular one that has a little bit of a higher quality images in it. And so, what do we use it for? And this is an interesting area as well. I feel like in interaction design these days, we're kind of moving away from the area of designing mobile apps or web apps, and we're moving into more future technologies, or maybe you'll call them current technologies now. We're talking about things like smart home, we're talking about VR, AR, we're talking about wearables. And in these areas, we need to create prototypes as well. So typically we used to create digital prototypes on our computers, and they just existed on screens. But now we're having to prototype for physical things, which typically would have been the realm of industrial design, but now interaction design is kind of gaining some of that territory. So when we want to create things like a smartwatch, or we want to create something like a thermometer, or even a CCTV device, if that's the outcome, if that's the end deliverable of a project, an interaction design project, then working towards that end deliverable, we have to think about how to prototype for it. We have to think about what are the incremental steps before we create that final product. And so the Raspberry Pi is a really great tool for prototyping and for creating something that's an earlier stage version of a smart home or a wearable or whatever it may be. That's kind of as much detail as I want to go into about the Raspberry Pi. I'll just kind of touch on this third area. So the Raspberry Pi is a bit about entrepreneurship, and I kind of want to play up on that thread and continue to play on that thread about entrepreneurship in talking about something called value proposition design. Just to start it off, there are a couple of great books around value proposition design. One is called Value Proposition Design, and the other one is called Business Model Generation. You see these books in business as well as design. Design and business have some overlap now, and so now we see something like value proposition design used within the interaction design world. The value proposition design canvas is really about starting with people. You may think of it as starting with an empathy map. understanding people, understanding a specific person, and what their day-to-day tasks might look like. And from there, you move into an end goal of what would a product or service be. But in using value proposition design, when you're creating that product or service, because you started with a real person and a real person's needs and a real person's day-to-day life, you know that this product or service is going to fit in for them in a very specific kind of way. And so you've created something of real value. You've created something that will work for someone, work for one person, maybe work for a group of people. That's something that you would have to explore yourself. I like to talk about the value proposition design as covering two paths. The first one is talking about pains. So we're talking about problems that a user has. We're talking about problem solving around those problems. We're talking about pain relievers. So how do we create something that deals with someone's struggle and addresses it and solves that struggle for them? So your product or service in the end is really about a problem-solving situation, and that's really what it does. The other opportunity is to talk about gain creators. So when we talk about gain creators, we're talking about gains. So we're talking about a person's day-to-day life, and we're talking about opportunities that happen within their day-to-day life. And what are those opportunities, and how do we play up on them? So with creating a gain creator, we identify something that a person likes with their day-to-day. Maybe they like meditation, or they like walking their dog, and then how do we play that up? So do we create a wearable device that interacts with what our dog walking activity looks like, and maybe that's our product or service, or whatever it may be. We're talking about focusing in on what the gains are for a user, and we're addressing those very specifically. So in doing that, we're again creating something that's very specific and tailored for a user, and this is a great jumping off point for creating an MVP, creating a first prototype for your startup, and something that will really resonate with real users. Those are the three kind of areas that I want to use as a jumping off point for conversation today. This conversation again is about real questions that I have, and I think I want to kind of jump into those questions, targeting that first bit that I talked about acronyms and definitions. So I kind of want to know a bit about what you guys think about these acronyms and definitions. These terms like product design or user experience design, are they different? Do they mean different things? Or are they just defined by what a company labels you as? Do they require different education to become those? Do they have different career paths? These kinds of questions are things that I wonder about and things that I don't have the answer to. So I want to use that as a jumping off point today and start a conversation around that. So thank you for listening for this first portion of me talking about myself, my introduction, and my questions, and my areas of interest. I'd like to turn the floor to you and ask you how you might introduce yourself, what areas of interaction design might be interesting for you, and then kind of come up with a question that you have, and maybe I'll give it a shot at answering some of those questions that might arise. But this is really about creating conversation and creating dialogue between us, all of us here, around interaction design, and hopefully learning something from it. So thank you.